Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Mish-Mashing Battle Lounge with the 2MK team. Today, Just Fine is in charge of the content, i.e. playing. And it looks like we have a burned spy from the only Nash dojo playing Sagat. But of course you have to find your times to play other characters at some point if your main concept, presumably during ranked or similar, is to play only Nash.
Round one. Fight.
This is a comfortable matchup for Just Fine in many ways, as long as she doesn't get over aggressive. It's not terribly hard for Bison to keep up with Sagat. It mostly comes down to how much of defense can you break. Because of course breaking Sagat's defense is definitely not easy, and therefore if you get over aggressive it'll be easier for Sagat to get big damage on you. But since Sagat himself is also relatively bad at breaking Bison's defense for various reasons, as you're seeing demonstrated here, it's at least a comfortable match. Even if Sagat decides to be more pressury, he's not a character with a whole ton of mix-ups. He has a lot more control, and Bison either disregards this control or doesn't care a lot. You do have to be on point, on guard with a lot of things. But again, this has a lot to do with, do you know your opponent's rhythm? Do you understand what is required to hit them to get through certain situations? And how flinchy are you, because flinchiness is going to be a problem. This comes up in a lot of characters' matchups. If you miss something important and get caught up in the fact that you've missed it, then all sorts of bad things tend to happen. Sagat is one of the characters who really pushes on this, because most zoners in the game can do this, but Sagat is particularly stressful about it because he makes you respond, but doesn't show any specific way. It's actually slightly harder to tell a Tiger EX from its normal counterpart compared to most other things. Tiger Cannon gets in. I mean, the constant idea is, I'm going to zone now, but if you just respond, you'll end up stressed out at least a little bit. Fortunately, Bison's spacings don't really lead to Sagat being able to hit a whole ton of buttons. He always seems to be just out of range. This can be resolved fairly easily if you're confident, by hitting light Tiger Knee, but this does rely on the fact that Bison doesn't expect this move, and it is basically, it can be checked, and mostly it just brings you closer. Do you want to get closer? That's up to you.
Round one. Fight.
You can of course join our lounge. Today it is 3 rounds versus 2 with character select on, for various reasons, mostly costumes. But we also have one less person joining today that we can save for sure, and that means we usually care about it the other way. One problem Bison can have, at least sometimes, is the long jump of Sagat, but Sagat also has problems with both Bison's longer jump and some specific spacings and situations that come up. Patience is of course paying off here so far, at least. Being able to build up V meter as heavily as Bison can in this matchup also really helps, because while it is difficult to use that for much when Sagat is into a strong zoning flow, you do get to build up a lot more of it to use for enhancing of Bison's dash and one or two other things. In this case, the V-Trigger, being V-Trigger 2, is not as likely to help out directly, because Sagat isn't a character where it matters a whole lot that Psycho Crusher is available. But it can be. But here we have more of that patience. Is it gonna work? No! That was pretty good. But unfortunately not the kill. They risked it, they didn't get anti-aired. And I think because of the style of the jump they might not have. It would have ended up being a trade, and Bison would have failed. Another problem that comes up is that Bison's reach generally makes whiffed tiger uppercuts, even light ones, kind of problematic. This isn't true for many characters. There are many characters who, while they have a punish, it's not as intimidating, stressful, doesn't necessarily lead to the same types of knockdowns or trouble, and so on. Good choice for the same reason. And that was probably a dropped uppercut.
You win.
The uppercut would have gone well in that space. Managing to keep the corner control, to check any attempts, keep the opponent's mind on that part of the game, pressure on. But didn't go that way.
Let's do this.
This is in fact a US East Coast, technically an Atlantic Rim lobby. This might end up being laggy. Hopefully not, of course. We've learned recently to not care too much about what the bars say. Unfortunately, we did see some sign of the bars fluctuating, which is usually a much worse sign than the bars being at any given number. That said, the changes they've made to the netcode have helped in various ways that are not quite what most people expected. You have to think of it more so as changing some of the problems. But that does mean that you will get a more consistent experience, i.e. you'll know pretty much right off whether or not it's going to be super laggy or not. For example, right now, we'd assume that it's not going to lag terribly, but there might be some moments where it's not so great. So let's continue to deal with and talk about this matchup. In order for Garou to win this matchup convincingly, he has to be really confident in both his jumps ranges and his boom timings, because as you can see, Jury can get through a lot of what Garou does. And one of the biggest problems he has is the strong forward range of her EX pinwheel, meaning that most of his weird jump based Sonic Blade shenanigans just don't work. One good option is to force her to waste it by getting his own jump working really well. Well, it's not laggy. We've gone to the other side of the problem. Will this cause a weird drop to back? Sometimes it does that. think it does depend at least somewhat on whose side drops, but their detection code for this would probably be quite difficult. And now it's double drop to back. Well, there we go.
Let's do this.
This player will have to forgive me for calling their character some boy. Or rather, they're using that as their naming. We say the same thing, the same indicator for the both. Atlantic Rim, anywhere along that line. If you're starting to get toward the Midwest and your internet is good, Midwestern USA, middle of Canada, if your internet is good, go for it. If not, don't expect a lot. Players from Europe are free to join as well, with the same caveat. You have a very pink Kareen now. Our Necalli players are quite used to fighting Kareen. They know all of the basic tricks for the matchup, all the basic things they need to do in the situation. Depending on the player, they get more things done, more neutral jumps, more control of the space, and better uses of Stomp. But we've also been recently discussing how Kareen should deal with Necalli. Necalli's push back means that stand medium kick in these quiet moments is a good option. As you can see there, it causes a specific type of pushback. That helps Kareen get either standard play or jump timing. And honestly, she can manage with basically just those things. She is a strong footsies character who is well versed in taking advantage of various openings, so if you feel as if you don't understand this matchup, the fact that Necalli is a straightforward character means you don't need to think too much about how this works. The rest is mostly mind games. You do see there, just demonstrated, one of the more advanced things you need to understand in the matchup if Necalli is using his V skill too. But overall, you can already see the flow is mainly at this quiet point, either betting on something or hitting stand medium kick. And if you expect your opponent is going to advance, for various reasons, Kareen can jump and this will normally beat Necalli's options, or at least not get her terribly hurt. But as mentioned before, you can use the Orochi to go through the Crawling Beast. Technically you can do this with any form of Seppo, but it's much harder to time a specific aspect of it without getting yourself hit afterward. The Orochi pulls her hurt box far enough forward to get through the move. Necalli can usually just react to this happening, but there's definite benefits to just using the move in neutral as well, similar to how it's done against G. It is definitely not that Necalli can't anti-air Kareen, but if you want to play the game without jumping ever, feel free to. If you can beat your opponent without ever jumping here, that's a strong thing to be working on, because it means that when you do occasionally jump, they'll probably not be ready for it. But as you can see, there is a strong benefit to this, especially if your opponent expects you to play the ground game. Unlike many of the other footsie characters in this game, Kareen's jump attacks are decently targetable. They don't have as many accuracy issues, let's say, as most of the other footsie style characters, and her jump isn't floaty like Chun-Li, for example. Necalli's back jump heavy kick is a strong option, in fact so is neutral jump heavy kick, but these still aren't really solving the main aspect of the problem here. The main aspect of the problem is simply that Necalli's reach is not enough to stop Kareen from doing certain things, and he can't just spend meter on every single approach. This guidance is unsafe to use, and you can't just dash at Kareen either. This means that he ends up with the feeling of having a relatively limited repertoire of ways to get in without her being able to jump. Or, of course, just hit footsie buttons. This therefore depends a lot on the skill of the Kareem player and Nikali's skill with stand-like kick. Mostly what you need to do is to do stuff like that. Perfectly space your disc guidance, because if she's waiting for the timing, you'll get your chance. Your stand-like kick, crouch medium kick, and just, you know, basic walk-ups with your medium punch help out a lot here. You can see it being demonstrated as we are now. But overall, it continues to be approximately an even match, without too much specifics in terms of how you need to think about it. Your main goal is to make sure that your disc guidance doesn't get blocked. Or if it does get blocked, that you have enough health to get through the situation. Well, it didn't really matter whether or not that was super or an ES uppercut, so well played both sides. You can definitely see the Wolf shifting toward being more aware of the fact that Kareem will need to jump, and using the back jump option primarily. Being ready with the back jump also prevents Kareem from getting a lot of other footsie options going, and you can therefore keep your position better. If this player did not know the behavior of Orochi relative to the Crawling Beast, therefore you could see that back jump as a strong tactic to get through a lot of things, but it's only average. This is similar to the flow of our Kareem bot in various ways, except that of course Kareem bot does not move with as much intent and will tend to leave herself open eventually. Kareem bot is technically one of our hardest bots, both to input if you're not familiar with the character. If you're familiar with Kareem as a character, she's actually surprisingly easy to input. But if you haven't played Kareem much, expect some stress. She is also one of our last because the actual point systems don't have much to do with what the bot spends most of its time doing, which can be a big problem for you. We definitely don't suggest that unless you feel as if you're good at other bots that you move on to this one, because it's too easy to become lazy and find yourself doing things, or rather, in order to try to get the points, you're dropping other things. You're not doing certain punishes, you're not teching throws, you're just looking for the best way to do it, to get points only. She's damaging enough, the bot that is, to make sure that, well, that's not sufficient. You will still have to do something. Especially if you aren't particularly good at teching throws. But most of our players get their Kareem experience from Kansuki Dynasty, aka Rune Siren, mainly because the Kareem bot is just not where you go straight up. And many of us don't have that much time to work through bots as a constant thing. In fact, that's kind of the point of them. They're there to help with the fact that most of the time, people who have a lot going on in their lives might not have time to set up fights with really strong opponents, getting used to new characters, finding someone who specifically knows what they're doing or where they're going with their character attack plan, or who just doesn't know the tricks or the parts of the matchup that are important. We do plan to expand some of the data relative to our bots to help people understand more about potential matchup parts. But people do need to find out their ways on their own fairly often. And for that, we offer you streams. Feel free to join them. You feel free to join this lounge, for example, which is every Monday, and are least likely to not happen, whereas our other content sometimes just doesn't happen. We almost always tend to have our Mish-Mashing lounge. But on to the Guile matchup. Guile versus Necalli is a lot about understanding when to backdash. Guile doesn't have a lot of really great backdash chases compared to many characters, and it's a situation that we mention often. You're going to take about the same amount of damage by backdashing out of a bad Guile pressure string, let's call it, as you are from just standing there. The more important thing is that if you can do this right, the Guile player has to think about more than their basic pressure and boom strike. They have to think of a way to actually land the hit when you decide to backdash, and that opens up more options for you. Oh, good jump out. Having this V-trigger is a strong shield against Guile stuff most of the time, but the way that Guile's Sonic Booms interacts, particularly Sonic Blade interacts with it, can be kind of a problem and a bit confusing as to what exactly it will do. It's not even consistent in what exactly it does, which is the biggest problem. The main thing you get out of it is that Necalli can confidently use this move and then block in almost all situations, meaning that Guile must act more. You do get the option of doing your uppercuts, therefore, but because Guile is such a deep jump, deep kicking style of character, you do have to uppercut. You have to be ready with this execution, because just using the crouch heavy punch will sometimes end up trading or even losing in weird situations. We can't tell entirely if that's startup or not, but definitely you're going to have to think about the fact that you will need the uppercut. But there's the backdash. And again, it's not really important whether or not you get caught. What's important is that by forcing Guile to think about it, other options have opened up to you that you have to think about. How he will mess up certain things, and stuff like that. Guile must change his pressure strings at least slightly, meaning that you now have actual ways through them. Because Guile has some pretty tight block strings, pressure strings, clear, I'm definitely getting away with this sort of things. You see them being demonstrated here. With nowhere to backdash to, obviously. At some point it would have been necessary to use the EX, but Cosmowolf tends to be really confident in this blocking business, and not too stressed about anything that happens during it. If you don't backdash out of Guile strings, it's harder to learn what the strings are, because you'll always get the same string, and you'll come to the conclusion that the character's strings are basically unstoppable, because why would they never seem to fail. If you just press out of the standard punch boom string, I think basically you just always lose. But backdashing out of them, because he, again, doesn't have great chase, will cause Guile to stagger things, use things a little differently, use strings that aren't as safe because he has to. And once you have this and you see them coming, or just guess really, you can try more of your own options for escaping things. There's a good jump out. Not sure about the side switch throw, but that was probably unintentional. This patience is really paying off here, because while Guile is definitely a character who can explosively do damage to Necalli in this scenario, and Necalli slowly loses this out, he doesn't necessarily lose out in the way you'd expect. And he can use that as the shield still, usually at even literally the last moments. But Cosmic Wolf goes for the disc guidance and is summarily punished for it.
Guile wins.
With some tight play from Samboy. I believe Burn's spy had shifted, which puts Just Fine back in the driver's seat, let's say.
Let's do this.
We do still have our 2 slots open. Normally we fill up more so by now, but it's probably a good thing, because the fact that we normally fill up means that by this time most people do not expect to even get in here. Another familiar matchup. But that does not mean it's actually all that meaningfully easy to play for either side. Juri benefits from having slightly longer range than Karine in a lot of situations if she's willing to do specials. And since Karine's whiff punishes for those specials are almost always relatively weak, or once again, more or less the same damage you were going to take anyway, Juri gets a lot of mileage out of doing more so specials than going for any form of actually playing footsies. This is actually an important thing to come up, because games have shifted a while. The more specials a character has, games that have very few, such as older Street Fighter games, when you understood footsies, it became super important, especially because you had no dashes. In this situation, Karine's goal therefore is to get slightly closer to Juri than she normally would get to any other character. She's not waiting for Juri to come to her, because Juri will find a way to get to her without really caring about Karine's buttons. Karine therefore is better off sticking closer to Juri, where she has slight advantages in frame data, forcing Juri to take hits simply because you can't challenge Karine's buttons on Juri as easily. The light hitboxes don't help. The complexity of Juri's normals makes it even worse. Juri can deal with this fairly easily by doing that, because that puts her at almost the perfect spacing for herself, whereas Karine doesn't benefit as much from being there. She has to take a risk almost every time.
You lose.
That said, Karine is not the easiest character to view reversal off you. Thankfully, almost all her moves end up in stances where the view reversal is likely to hit. It's relatively difficult for this character to force Juri's view reversal to whiff while still showing reasonable pressure. Just Fine generally has strong enough defense to keep this up for a long time, but because of the nature of the character matchup, Karine doesn't ever have to actually stop doing this. And because she's so oppressive, Juri won't really get much chance to charge Fuha in any way, except, like, right then. This is actually a better situation now, but with the relatively fast and aggressive jump out, you would have to have trained the air throw really hard for that to not end up being like that. But it is something to think about if you are a Juri player who wants to deal with Karine as a generality. Put all of your effort into getting her into the corner, and then just go for the air throw. Or rather, expect to need the air throw, because she has nowhere to walk back to, causing her more stress. Similarly, her jump-ins get the same reaction. You can air throw your way through a ton of Kareen's jumps because of something to do with the timing and when she has to hit the button compared to many characters. You can also dash under her, but this often results in her just hitting a different button. We did mention that audio might be a little intermittent today. It might also be a little choppy, but I doubt it's going to matter enough. Just expect some weird audio fluctuations, one way or the other. Okay, we are back to Guile, and the Wolf's side. It's hard to say if this will turn out better or not, because it depends on the Guile. But we've already discussed the fact that the bat dash will be important. The crawling beast does help, but the Wolf's style also tends to lead to different spacings, which make it a little less effective. Guile usually can maneuver his way around it by just using Slow Boom as a shield, or worse, Slow Sonic Blade as a shield. Once again, forcing the "you must be ready to uppercut" situation. Guile also has no reason to play footsies against Necalli ever. In fact, you're honestly better off never assuming you can ever hit a footsie button. There's just no benefit to it. Guile will outmaneuver basically all of Necalli's normals, except his stand medium punch. And if you're hitting stand medium punch, you're probably not getting anything. It means you're in the wrong space. You could take your time and get the hit just for, you know, a little bit of extra damage, but you're not going to get anything. You can watch even high-level play of Necalli. They'll mostly just play raw offense against this character because while it's not impossible to poke around at him, the Guile has to be a specific type of Guile. The Wolf going for the back jump instead of the back dash in one of those situations where it really does help. But Samboa here is definitely pushing forward in ways that will just overwhelm the crawling beast setups most of the time. And the loop? No, dropped it. But again, not ready with the uppercut, and the jump takes it.
Guile wins.
One of our Guile bots jumps a lot, and one of our Guile bots basically never jumps. Figure out which of the types you have trouble against, the Guile you can't get in on, which is our Guile bot 1, which mainly trains you to Bulldog, and to punish certain very specific strings that Guile uses when you get too close to him. Let's assume you did get in, but you didn't manage to get in enough to actually land any hits. Guile has some nice counter pressure, but it tends to end in a way that he's counting on you not being able to punish something, at least at this level. That specifically. In fact, thanks both players for demonstrating what I was talking about in that moment. There is a timing at which you can punish Guile's bullet knee. Basically, he didn't get a chance to throw a boom before it. In fact, it is precisely for this reason that a Guile bot is set up that way, and if you do manage to input it correctly, you'll find that it basically doesn't do the move. You have to be able to push it to the point where it will do the move. Because the way the move is hidden, you just won't see it. This is to help you become conditioned to the fact that seeing the move is not in itself an indicator that you should try to punish it. You have to be in a situation where he's quite close to you and you've had a good reason to think you could hit it. That, for example, where it hits with the tip of the knee, is absolutely not punishable. You can get some stuff out of it, and Akali in particular, if you're daring enough, can just go for EX command grab. But I wouldn't suggest that even now. Again, it's just another situation of your opponent is doing stuff, walk back or backdash. Unfortunately, built up too much meter, and I guess the uppercut became a super. A daring jump, but Garou was holding him down back anyway, so.
Guile wins.
Using Argyle Bot 2 could be a lot more helpful for this sort of training, because you do have to be ready with the jump, with the anti-air, usually an uppercut style, but it also helps you train cross-up style ones so that you can, if you have a need for cross-up DP and similar things, you practice that way. That said, he's not really perfect for the purpose, despite one of the systems of the bot being to do this, because you don't generally have a good reason to do this unless you're trying to get in on him yourself. If you wait for Argyle Bot 2 to do things and then jump, it's not going to feel at all the same as dealing with a real Guile player. I think we have this on the page, but it bears repeating now if you are listening to me and thinking, oh, I should go do one of these bot things and see what it does for me. Please remember to think about how you need to fight Guile normally, because almost all our bots are designed in that way. You should fight them in the way your character naturally does, even though they're not necessarily presenting all the same stressors that a real player presents. Our Nash bot, on the other hand, it looks a lot like this, honestly. Again, just a bit more targeted. But this is of course intentional. Bots are just the best collection we could find of the standard strategies that a player uses, along with any craziness that we could manage to get in. Nash is also a character where understanding what exactly Nash is doing that's tricky is so difficult for most players that you can't just go, well, here's Nash's trickery and here's what you need to do and here's how you beat Nash as a character. You don't beat Nash the character, you more so beat the player playing Nash and work things out from there.
Round 2. Fight.
Well, this person definitely has to jump back. Air throw on point. So it's going to be a little harder for this Korean player to get their jumps, I think. Good timing on their Senha though. And a very clear idea of the range of that move. This is what experience gets you. There's some more.
Nash wins.
This is another important aspect of bots, but it's not really easy to clearly explain. Many of them are built such that you can just play somewhat normally, test out ranges, and watch for when weird things happen. When you've gotten good enough at a bot that you can just play it on a day and get to 10 points both times, usually we suggest doing it twice, in case one is just the bot behaving weird that day. If that is your situation, you're probably at the stage where you could look at things happening in the interactions. You've seen it so many times that when something weird does happen, it might teach you something. Air throw is one of the strongest anti-airs in this game, don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Ooh, the jump back. Chip and dodged.
It can't be over. Round 2. Fight.
A Nash bot also has what we call an open input. Our bots are created out of specific sequences of the Street Fighter V action recording options, and sometimes we don't need all 5 of them in order to get the bot functional. Usually we just add something simple that can be replaced without changing the rhythm too much. Something that acts basically on its own, and when another action plays into it, basically doesn't do anything. In our Nash bot, that is its action 5, and that is mostly just him jumping forward. Once you've gotten used to Nash's jumps, and don't need enough practice with it, you can change this to anything you've seen that anyone has ever done that makes things complicated. Even long sequences go in fairly well. And if you wanted to learn how to work on bots and cause them to interact properly, Nash's Action 5 is a good place to start, because he has so many other moves that use all of the other required options and techniques for bot construction. But has almost no meaningful use, because all we did was make it do like his Tragedy Assault, and depending on how you did the input, it won't even do that.
Nash wins.
That win quote actually mattered this time.
It's go time.
But they've dropped to back. And we are joined by what I believe was Hatsune Miku 01 from Japan. I'm not expecting a lot here. I've never heard Hatsune Miku mention being good at Street Fighter V. But you never know. The VTuber Vocaloid scene is growing. Which might lead to more options for practice. Always good to have your own scene. This matchup is a good place to demonstrate the difference between what Karine is able to do here and what Juri is able to do here, and help people who have considered playing one character or the other understand the difference between the normals and why it matters. Juri has mostly the same ranges on her normals and often very similar styles of timing for them, but she has what we continually call light hitboxes. It means basically that her hitbox doesn't extend in the way you'd expect it to, as early as you'd expect it to, or tends to interact with other people's active hitboxes in ways that force trades or sometimes straight up losing. So whereas Karine basically, once she gets into a middle point here, just hit stand medium kick, Juri can, but she won't always get the same benefits out of it. Namely, Necalli can hit both stand heavy kick and stand medium kick, and end up in weird situations relative to this. But she does have that same aspect of when she's gotten there and expects Necalli to advance, one of her better options is still to jump. The difference is that Juri often won't need to hit a button when she's jumping.
Round 2. Fight.
She has more options for quickly punishing any action Necalli takes once she's on the other side, first of all. And she also much more easily deals with just landing and being able to go for a tick throw, whereas Karine's tick throw is a little bit less effective. But again, this is mostly about whether or not you think Necalli is going to try to walk forward or use a special to bring himself forward to get you, more so than you should jump against Necalli. You do see there one of her stronger options. She may not be able to just hit medium kick, but she can use the medium fuha. And she can actually both build it up and save it for the same situation. Necalli has very, very few direct responses to this move. You'd think he'd just hit like a jab or something. But somehow it doesn't work, mainly because specials don't trade with normals generally. And it makes Necalli very buttonsy in order to prevent the move from coming out at all. It's not unreactable, but it's not like you benefit a lot from waiting for it. So building up a medium fuha if you expect to be in a situation where you're both just kind of sitting there really helps Juri's flow. And that can be coupled with the jump to get the same benefit styles as Karine does. Necalli can deal with this by doing what Cosmic Wolf is doing and backing off more, but that's changing the rhythm of the fight, and Juri doesn't do all that poorly against retreating Necalli. She just has to do a lot of nothing. Recognizing that you have to do a lot of nothing is important, because obviously if you don't, you'll end up getting yourself into trouble for other reasons, but it definitely helps to have the fuha stocked so that if you do anything crazy, you usually have enough cancels to get yourself out of the situation. And that, I believe, was probably dropped super or dropped pinwheel given the spacing it was at.
Round 2. Fight.
But Cosmic Wolf's decision was also clean in that if she did happen to block, it was just going to be the standard. And then it would possibly lead to being able to bait that same move. A cornered opponent with full meter, definitely the sort of person who thinks about using their meter for stuff. And now we're back here. The medium fuha gets stocked because the high octane part of the match has just ended. If the Necalli player starts thinking, okay, I need to wait here for her to do this move, they get dashed on or jumped or thrown or something. If your reactions are super good and you have the capacity to react to both things in time, by all means defend, but it's not helping you a lot. And once again, the high octane part of this is basically over, and Juri has to do a lot of, let's say, nothing. time we get Pinwheel. A good choice given that it was all it was necessary really, and saving more meter for the third round.
Fight.
We are still in a relatively high octane part, but as soon as it's over, right, then you have that again. Go straight for offense instead. But that's a matter of knowing an opponent.
You win. It's go time.
We're about halfway through our stream. Apparently Hatsune Miku is a Ken player. Somehow this doesn't surprise me.
Garou base at night.
As you can see from that jury costume, if you assume that someone was just going to play a character they looked like, then obviously Hatsune Miku would be a jury player and just use the blue hair costume. But that would involve having met jury. On the other hand, you really can't argue that a Vocaloid shouldn't play Mech Jury. But that's really not the point. Vocaloid should be able to play whoever they want.
Round one. Fight. Round two. Fight. Round one. Fight. Round two. Fight. You win. It's go time. Let's do this. Garou base at night. Bison. Ken.
Hey, I was waiting for you.
$3 to Japan. If this is for real, I actually expect it to be decent. Not terribly good, but decent. The question is whether or not it will be enough for most of Ken's mix-ups to be visible. He doesn't have a lot, and enough experience with Kenbot will tell you what's probably going to happen regardless. Ken's footsies are technically the harder thing to deal with here. But, no. Of course, bearing in mind that one can just use the flag for anywhere, and they could easily be in New York or something. Midwest, just getting some games in. Shifting your geographical position is not going to change your flag. Understanding the exact spacing at which you can parry, jump around, or deal with that move is definitely something our Kenbot is meant to teach you. Don't venture into the world without it. It's hard to tell most of the time if Ken players are trolling at the same time, so generally you should just treat them as if they are Kenbot, not out of disrespect, but simply that until they've demonstrated that they have really specific tricks that they intend to use, the character, as has been consistently complained, is relatively limited in what he can actually do. A lot of what is possible from Ken is mind games, like this. And you have to get used to that quite heavily as a player. If you're thinking to yourself, why does this Ken player keep on repeating stuff? They keep on repeating stuff because Ken has to repeat stuff eventually. And because technically the character is built such that it's supposed to work. It is a comment of ours quite often that the mark of a true Ken is the fact that they will do stuff like that. They'll just suddenly decide to do something. Hot-bloodedness all the way.
Round one. Fight.
Understanding how to use that against a Ken player is not really possible. Because it's not about using it against the player, it's about not letting them use it against you. There's a good example of it. If you get hit by the throw, then just take the throw. Stressing yourself out about the fact that Ken managed to land a throw is probably not in your best interests. You can practice throw attacking against Kenbot, but Ken players don't throw at timings that Kenbot does, or technically any timings.
Round two. Fight.
One decent option is to just try to keep them at range to the point where it's not an issue. At which point you're mostly just testing your own reactions and nothing else. And for many characters this is a really decent method of playing, to the point where it got Ken a really bad rap for a long time. Against zoning characters, he just didn't stay up enough. And he easily gets put in as just weaker Akuma for this reason. Because Akuma can do specific things from longer ranges, whereas Ken tends to be a little more predictable and rely on your inability to counter whatever he's doing. But if you're not lacking ability to counter Ken, then the situation doesn't tend to go Ken's way much. That one got close.
Final round.
You could almost say that Ken is a character with relatively heavy hitboxes. You have to be quite good at exactly timing your counterattacks, or Ken will tend to hit you even though your timing wasn't honestly all that bad. But of course this is by design. He's a character meant to be able to power through other people's stuff. Always has been, and really got a lot more of it going on this time. This is gonna scale weirdly. Yeah. Fortunately, that's enough spacing to do some stuff, except the Bison's already in V-trigger. In this case though, through the power of true Ken, everything down to the wire, I'm gonna uppercut. Unlike most,
Let's do this.
you're going to have to worry about it every time. But we have Omni Rabbit in lounge now. A little earlier than usual, maybe? I haven't been keeping track of exactly when Omni Rabbit has made it to lounges in terms of time before, especially not if I was talking. But it's probably a good thing, assuming that this turns out to be a Ken match, because this is one of Omni Rabbit's favorite matches to play. Anything to the effect of a Ken who will recognize that you can get through all their stuff, but go, well, I don't have other stuff, so you're gonna have to put up with it. Most players at the bronze and silver level are more so used to the Ken that kind of gives up after their mix-ups and stuff don't work. But you have to be fairly stubborn to play Ken properly. So, let's see what we get. Omni Rabbit is good at stopping a lot of Ken things, but that won't change anything. If the player is truly in tune with this character, then they're going to go for it anyway. It's not as if you go, oh, people have learned how to counter my heavy Tatsu, I should never do my heavy Tatsu. That's not how that goes. Get into their heads, mess with their spacing, and go for it. The underdodge this time. If you spend enough time with Kenbot, you'll come up with all sorts of crazy ways to counter that move. And they still won't always work. That's more so on the design of Ken as a character than the Kenbot though. It could also be if you don't put the input Kenbot particularly well, but it is not terribly hard to do. You're more likely to mess up the Hadouken and jump timings than the heavy Tatsu bit. In fact, in that spacing, you wouldn't necessarily be able to tell unless you'd fought it a lot, but Omni Rabbit was probably able to recognize, oh wait, they got the Tatsu timing right. Therefore, I'm not timing and spacing right, that is. I'm not ready with my heavy bolt. It's basically the only thing that counters this move at this point. I should just block. And the opponent, knowing that, presumably, or maybe just being Ken, went for ES uppercut. Good stuff. But life leads are not real against Lara. Not even this one. Risky, but still paid off. Fireballs instead. Getting the mindset in the right space for, there we go.
Ken wins.
We've considered trying to get that move into Kenbot more easily. He can in fact have it, depending on how your inputs are. And there's a specific one where it's fairly easy to input it, but we're still working on what exactly to do and whether or not anything of that nature should be Kenbot too. So far, no indication. It's not just not complex enough as a character. In fact, it's kind of better to have the Ken that keeps doing this sort of thing. Because people who decide, well, Ken has too many flaws, I'm not playing at a high level, are not the people you care about. The people you care about are Hatsune Miku 01. And it's for that reason that it's also so important that you learn to never drop a Shoryuken punish against this character. Because you gotta get that damage somewhere. That would probably be the only reason. But that counter isn't the counter style that you need to practice in that specific way, and you can always change Kenbot to just do EX uppercut instead. A little early on the sway there. Omni Rabbit, on the other hand, has that moment of recognizing, I can't not get hit by Ken. It doesn't matter that Ken's stuff is all seeable or punishable. That's not really the point of the character. And therefore is able to stay a little calmer in the scenarios where, oh, I got hit. Because you're gonna get hit. Losing your focus and therefore your combat potential in certain situations is actually your bigger problem. Because even this life lead normally is not real. But went for the super. Not exactly sure why, given that technically, now that I think about it, this player has not demonstrated that they believe in Ken wake up pressure. But on the other hand, maybe he went for it because that was the exact moment that someone would do Ken wake up pressure. This match I expect to be a lot more interesting. Cosmic Wolf had the misfortune of not having a great Ken bot for a while, but also obviously therefore getting a much better one later. Necalli's options against Ken are very tight in terms of timing, but Cosmic Wolf is also really patient in specific ways and really gutsy at almost random times. Not the sort of person who would necessarily be a Ken player, but definitely the sort of person who understands the mindset of a Ken player. Understanding the mindset of a Ken player will not help you to change any of these things. Please understand this disclaimer. Most Ken players are in fact at least some amount of random, again because the character practically requires it. He's not built to have a lot of I'm going to do this and you're going to not know what's happening. You know what's happening. You're just being tested a lot and strained. And occasionally if the player realizes you lost track of my spacing, then they will get you with something.
Round one.
But Cosmic Wolf doesn't tend to care about any of that normally. It's just a matter of, okay, do what you're going to do and I'll do what I'm going to do and we'll see what happens. And sometimes what Cosmic Wolf is going to do is heavy kick a lot. This is where Ken's pressure tends to help a lot in this game. But it doesn't help that much against Necalli. Necalli has too many options to deal with Ken pressure relative to other things for it to just work. Builds up meter quickly, and can use multiple specifics of getting out of situations. Fortunately for Ken, pressure can convert into really big damage and make this work out. But there's a sure upper. The big bet. Because Ken can absolutely throw after that, and you don't know if Ken will throw after that, and it's kind of hard to tech the throw. Because how to tech the throw depends on when you got hit in the Tatsu, and whether or not the Tatsu was in V-trigger or not, etc. Those things are things that Kenbot will teach you. But you're still always going to have to deal with what's happening here. If you can get good enough to not have to worry about... Ooh, might be able to get to... Yes, can get to V-meter from here. Ken is fishing for super, technically. But it's not necessarily going to be enough, because it's a question of can Necalli get meter before then. Unfortunately for Necalli, regular moves... There we go. Ah, the dash fails. But since you can't actually build up more from there, the pressure gets through. The V skill will not build up anything else. You can't build regular meter using it. So if you're fishing to get up to the last bit of meter you need to pose a threat to your opponent, you're a little limited there. But in this case, yes, Ken pressure is a bit more helpful. Nakali can, of course, just V reversal out of a lot of it. And this is important to understand about the game in general. If your character has an uppercut that can be just used as an invincible option, if they have a fairly far-reaching 5-frame move that combos well, that goes along with this uppercut, your V reversal is generally, strictly speaking, stronger. Your opponent is thinking about those options, and you get to use the V reversal more often simply because they're not trying to bait the V reversal. If your opponent knows that you don't have any invincible options, they're much more likely to spend time baiting your V reversal and not care as much when they're pressuring you. So you could always say, but simply by having invincible moves, a character's V reversal can be considered to be stronger, depending on what it is. Of course, the V reversal does tend to have to hit, but even there's some cases where not even this is true. Ed is a good example of a character where Ed's V reversal is stronger because Ed has moves that fill a good slot and an invincible one. Even though Ed's actual uppercut can be baited in some really weird ways, it's still not a situation where mostly what you'll see is the person trying to bait the V reversal from Ed, especially since Ed's V reversal doesn't even hit, so they have to do different things anyway. Nakali's big problem is, of course, that once he does activate V trigger, despite having a really good V skill for building meter in many situations, the V trigger is permanent. You can't V reversal anymore. So it's always, at least somewhat, a choice of how pressury is this opponent, how much do I have to worry about this, can I or should I activate V trigger. Ken is not really a character where activating the V trigger will often get you a lot in neutral, so it basically comes down to your gut feeling, I guess. I'm really interested to find out how good the connection between these two players is, but again, I don't think this player is actually in Japan. Maybe Hatsune Miku is on tour. Which would explain the random, chilling playing Street Fighter V on Martin Luther King Day. Bunch of random places are closed. Nothing in particular to do other than, join the civil rights movement or something. But we have more Ken. Thank goodness. I would be somewhat afraid to see what this player plays like on other characters. Because you can usually see. I've gotten to the point where I think I can feel out what characters people play as their secondaries just by watching how they play the one I'm watching. It also helps that people tend to pick the same sorts of secondaries for the same characters depending on their personality. You can't necessarily say a Nakali player is a certain type of person, but you can definitely say a Nakali Urian player is a certain type of person. Fortunately, you don't really have to make this sort of distinction with a Ken that has come to do Ken things, because they are Ken. They're doing Ken things. The Wolf's style of play here is going to be really rough, because Ken has too many ways past Crawling Beast, first of all, and too many good situations where you can't stick out buttons, and still have to be on guard for a bunch of stuff. And while this seems to be working out and ending up being very tradey, the bigger problem is that Ken has built up a lot more meter. The wolf's strength here being able to tell, to some extent, what the opponent is likely to do, better than most other people, leading to a lot more confidence in defense, or rather confidence in neutral that's about to lead to defense. The sort of person who can tell, you dashed into Tatsu, I know what's coming after the Tatsu. And does stuff like that. I think they've whiffed 4 throws? So, honestly, because again, it's Ken, playing too technically here or having too many technical aims here would probably be bad. If anything, the wolf's best bet is to rely on gut instinct and use a lot of crouch medium kick, honestly. Crouch medium kick does some good things for Necalli's spacing against Ken, not necessarily after pressure, but is better at checking most of Ken's approaches than most other buttons, and causes Necalli to low profile a couple of very strange things. Judgment time. What's the mix up? There we go. But didn't kill, so still good mix up. Obviously Ken could have forward jumped out of this, but you're not really thinking about that right away.
Round 1. Fight.
You still in there? Hatsune appears to have been called away. I suppose that's the fairest thing you could do. There we go. They're awake. And now even in health. While it's not going to be too pivotal, the reason why the crouch medium kick works is more to do with the way that Ken has to move once he is either just outside range or just within it. This character's amount of capacity to guard his legs is not great. But Wolf didn't have enough health there, probably, for the standard I'll just wait you out to work. Oh, they got around it. In short, if you've got a good crouch medium kick, just go with your instincts about when you think the Ken player will finally stop hitting buttons, because if you think they're going to stop hitting buttons, they either have to walk away, and Ken's... One of the things that came up on a stream a long time ago is that Ken is a fairly poor character in terms of true pressure. He hits 3 buttons and then he really can't hit any more. The next button is going to whiff. Which means his main option at that point is to walk away from you or jump back. If he jumps back, you're not necessarily in any danger, so you're free to hit your crouch medium kick or whatever. And if he tries to walk back, you might clip him. Contrast this to Akuma, who will do any number of things that still come forward but don't involve taking any risk of getting hit by a crouch medium kick.
It's go time. Let's do this.
This matchup is technically a lot easier on Rainbow Mika because she has so many more counters to Ken stuff. Whether or not Just Fine will actually take advantage of this, I can't say, but it's a general option that she has available.
Hey, I was waiting for you.
So just understand that in this case, for example, she's specifically choosing to not just pick a counter and go with it. That said, even the counter isn't a matter of, well, yeah, I'm going to beat you now. It's simply that Mika has so many more tools for dealing with Ken's more basic tools, forcing it a lot closer to footsies. But we're back to this, and again the question is, how much of this can actually be countered in terms of physical ability? Reactions, understanding of a specific type of spacing, and so on. Bison is another character who does in fact get to hit the crouch medium kick versus Ken after a couple close range buttons, but Ken players just tend to not hit those against Bison because they can usually get something out of a jump forward rather than a jump back. You can tell how fast that round was because there's basically no meter involved here. That is a lot of damage. But another uppercut! It is partially because of this that Ken does have that cancel out of normals from the run, because it lets him get in closer and stay there without you getting to make a decision in that time frame. You can't go, well, Ken has hit 3 buttons, he must cancel into a special now, or nothing. He can cancel into something else that kinda works. That was a little bit of a push. Not sure what they were expecting there, but I guess technically it would have countered a scissor kick. And there are good reasons to do scissor kick there, so they made the bet, and I guess it did not work out today.
Round 1. Fight.
There's that long jump again. Characters with very long jumps are harder for Bison to anti-air because you must time the crouch heavy punch better, otherwise you just get hit, and they can get around Psycho Burst. They're too far away for the standard jump medium punch to work. Honestly, it tends to lead to Bison having to do some really crazy things, but fortunately, EX Head Stomp is at least there in the option space, if you really need it. The sheer Ken-ness. While Ken is not the bot we suggest you train on for dealing with the Hadoukens at close range, the training required does come up, and he does enough of them that you can use it for the same thing. The full Kata 22 is not really a Ken bot thing. You do have to do that with Ryu for various reasons. But you can apply the same principles to Ken, see how many times you can actually punish the standard Hadouken.
Round 1. Fight.
He can push himself out to the point where this doesn't work, but most of the time, if that's happening, you're winning. That's all I can say. It would be very long to explain why you're probably winning. There you see Bison's best option if the player isn't really trying to land the jump kick. He can in fact just use jumping light kick himself and cause things to happen, but this only works if the heavy kick was never going to hit and was just intended as a method of causing trouble. The explosive volatility of the uppercut means you can never know whether or not to stop. That said, if you're winning fairly convincingly in any form, you could really, most of the time, just bait every never do anything. Always bait the uppercut. If your situation is like this, for example, you just never bother. And you'll notice that our player immediately just uses the meter for something else. They don't have the life lead, so why uppercut right then? The overroll. Good use of that. Unfortunately for Ken, and I don't think they knew that, it doesn't really get over that in the same way you'd expect it to. But no more meter for the reversal, meaning that this is going to come down to the chip. Bison basically has one way out of that. It could have worked, but the reaction time is really difficult. Because the EX head stomp is strike invincible, there was a way out of that. Which means that probably they knew that and probably went, I'm going to bet. And they bet. The main thing that up-and-coming players need to understand is that once you've gotten through Kenbot, once you feel as if you actually could, you have a chance of reacting to any of these things. You shouldn't necessarily take that to mean that you can just beat Ken all the time. Nor should you take it to mean that losing to randomness in this form indicates that you haven't trained enough. Again, Ken, by design, will hit you. He's supposed to do this. Heavy hitboxes help a lot. Gutsiness also helps a lot. In order to beat Ken, you have to have a stronger strategy than Ken. Knowing how to counter Ken's moves will probably never be enough, because at least some of this is going to be, did Ken choose to uppercut in this moment or not? And because the character can be so freestyle, having a strong strategy becomes even more important. Because Ken players are able to spend most of their fight thinking about strategy. They don't have to think, can I do this? Do I need to set up this setup? They can just go, nah, well, I'll uppercut, and while my uppercut is happening, I can think about how to win the rest of this. It doesn't necessarily matter whether or not the uppercut hit, because they have lots of time either way. Many Ken players in the mid-levels, not apparently this one, struggle with this in certain ways, because they want to not get hit out of the uppercut. They want to not get crush countered. But it's so hard to learn to not get crush countered and still get the most out of the uppercut. Is a tool that, if used too sparingly or used without being able to randomly commit to it, if you try to go, I'm afraid of getting crush countered, maybe I shouldn't uppercut, it's hard to actually get the uppercut as a thing that really surprises your opponent. You tend to telegraph your intent in some small way, and there are definitely players that will pick up on the subtle cues of when you're stressed enough to not uppercut It's just that many players have to get used to the fact that at the lowest levels, stressed Ken players do uppercut, and at the higher levels, stressed Ken players don't uppercut. But Miku is doing a good job of not showing either the stress or being so in tune with the character that you still cannot tell when there will or will not be an uppercut. I think Omni Rabbit dropped something there, but I'm not sure what.
Ken wins.
Part of the problem is that thinking that you can counter most things that Ken does, or thinking, I'm gonna bait this uppercut and then everything will be great, is a good way to get yourself wound up. And Ken is counting on that. Ken is counting on you to, as a player, get wound up about getting thrown, or missing a combo because of some weird spacing, or not managing to land a thing and getting punished. Ken is counting on this because the faster this happens to you, the harder it gets for you to punish anything. This is another thing you see in Blanca players as well. If you find someone who says that they play Ken and their secondary is Blanca, I'm not saying you should think badly of this person, but don't think a lot about this person. If your response is, yeah, I better come up with a strategy, you should still do that, but it shouldn't be based on anything the opponent is doing. Ken is a great test of how strong your own core strategy is. How do you want to play this game? Because Ken does not care about how you're going to react to Ken. You've decided, I am playing this game this way. Do that, because you can't make Ken be different. If you're someone who goes for the pressure all the time, well, make sure that the Ken player doesn't have enough meter to uppercut out of every time. Make sure your pressure is so good that you don't have to worry about that. If you've decided, I'm someone who's going to play defensively and always be ready for whatever, then be really ready for whatever. Don't decide, oh, I haven't done enough damage, so I should go in now. Stick to what you believe in. If you're just the average player that is equally, you know, just instinctive, core, going for whatever, you probably didn't have the same problems as the rest of us and didn't need to think about it much. Which is what we were discussing before with Cosmo. There is a button that works for that on Laura, but I don't remember what it is.
Ken wins.
It's not her heavy punch, and it's not the medium punch. But then now I can't think of what it is. I think the light kick maybe works. But today has been a good test of specifically that. Learning exactly how wound up or not wound up one is. We are, however, getting close to the end of our stream. This is either the second last match of the night, or if somehow it goes on really long, the last on-stream match of the night. Whether or not we are actually going to keep the lounge going is unclear today. Most likely we'll close it when the Ken player leaves, but it's not assured either way. After all, this does burn quite a lot of focus. But we are back around to Cosmic Wolf. Who had some decent success before. But again, one of the larger problems that comes up here is, can you uppercut correctly? And correctly against Ken has a lot of caveats to it. Fortunately, Nikali does a lot of crush counter damage. And the same thing applies here as it did when mentioning the wolf. There is a space at which Ken is either going to keep coming or try to walk away from you almost all the time. If he jumps back, he doesn't get as much, and honestly, Nikali I think can hit him with medium disc guidance without necessarily worrying about getting kicked. I think he could get kicked though. The basic idea here though is Ken pressure is the part of this that Cosmic Wolf probably has to worry about. And the myriad options Nikali has for getting out of this, combined with the crouch medium kick potential, should make this a little bit easier. But yes, you do have to worry and be ready for someone who does sweep on your wake up. Got it with the perfect jump.
Round 2. Fight.
For those of you who have been listening to this relative to Kenbot, you can find that at our website 2-mk.org. To go straight to Kenbot, you just put in Ken-bot. But our bots page handles Street Fighter bots in particular, whereas other games tend to have their acronym, such as UNIST, because we haven't upgraded to Unclear.
Ken wins.
Or DOA, even though those bots are still useless. The bots themselves are fine, but DOA's system for how you can use them is nowhere near as effective as Street Fighter's is, so we still don't promote them. Should come up with more of them anyway though. But if there was ever an endorsement of the exact reason why our Kenbot is the way it is, this stream would probably be it. Sure, bots are random. But technically, so is Ken.
Round 2. Fight.
And if that randomness can be turned into a real strength, a real get into your opponent's head and cause them problems, like that, then there is something to be said for it. If you're the sort of person who's comfortable enough with, yeah, there we go. I've been looking for that for this entire stream. Because that is ultimate Ken right there. Given the speed of that match overall, though, we're probably having one more on stream, assuming they stay around. If they decide that this is their moment to leave, the stream will in fact end. And probably the lounge will close, unlike usual. How long the lounge stays open is usually another half an hour, and since there aren't as many players in it today, you can probably join now and get a shot at a game if you want to. Good chance that people will be leaving or just dropping to back and taking a break off of whatever so that you can get your own play if you want to face off with Hatsune Miku. Says even if Just Fine wins, there's probably not going to play again directly. That said, if she does, there's always a chance that they'll leave. I was about to get afraid that we were going to see a different character, but no. Some people know their truth and they stick to it. Bison's V reversal unfortunately is a little easier to bait than most, making this a little too easy for Ken in certain situations, and forcing a lot more time spent trying to get to a specific range or understand the range. Ken gets a lot more control in this match, basically. Bison can, however, avoid some of the situations by saving meter to do EX Psycho Inferno. The precise timing for this move is similar to an uppercut. You just use it because you think it's going to work. This is mainly because if the player is being very serious, or rather as serious as you can understand a Ken player to be, a Ken player of this level and caliber to be, the main thing you're going to get is timing to use your EX head stomp. And while in that situation it might have been better, for example, because of the level of telegraphedness of what was happening, sometimes you don't have that. It's not a reaction to things though, there we go. It's a, this'll probably work.
Round 2. Fight.
This forces Ken players to think more about where they jump from, which helps Bison to get other anti-airs going. You can do this with medium, I believe, as well, but it's obviously less effective because you can't let yourself get into the tendency to just do the medium one. You'll get crossed up. And there you have a demonstration of what I meant before. Tactically, the downside there was getting the max damage out of the crush counter. You're going to get more crush counters. Tactically, if you could do it in the heat of the moment, as very high level players tend to do, you'd probably see a decision like, I'm not using my meter here because I need it for something else. And this knockdown just gets me another chance to get uppercut. So you can think of those little things as sorts of things you can train. If that has worked, you should see some jump timings and spacings from Ken that are more likely to lead to Bison being able to anti-air in any number of ways. Because it just works. You can, as I said, just use the medium one sometimes. It also has a good option for using in that space where Ken is neutral jumping. And as you can see there, that's easily possible, but Ken's Tatsu spacing has to be, let's call it, wrong. That was the big outcome here. This was the, this is working and here's the why. A matter of Ken being forced to play under a scenario where things are not quite under Ken's control, they're not working in the way Ken wants. You've thrown off something, and by throwing off something in the rhythm, you can do other things. Force the use of more meter. Get better anti-airs. Whiff punish sweep with slide. Unfortunately, that one has to be done really early. But that's the best way to think of it. Your tactic, your concept of how to fight the match has to be literally stronger, like emotionally stronger than that of the Ken player. going to be a little rough now without any meter, but if Just Fine gets a little bit of a lucky hit in any direction, maybe she'll get some. This is what I was speaking about before. With Nikali, you don't have the real same options from Ken's side. You can't just do that and eventually expect that you'll be able to bait the reversal. But either way, that brings us to the end of our stream, and not necessarily the end of the lounge, so hop on in if you'd like to. You're looking for Just Fine, with 3 rounds first to 2 and character select on today. This has been Rillian for Team 2MK. Good luck with your training and good night, everyone.